Hello there. How are you tonight? I hope you're ready to relax and slowly drift into the quiet world of the past. Tonight, we travel back many centuries to a small medieval village in the middle of winter. The sun has already disappeared behind gray clouds, and darkness settles over the land far earlier than we are used to today. A cold wind moves across the frozen fields. Snow gathers along the narrow dirt roads, and inside small wooden cottages, families prepare for another long and bitter night. For medieval peasants, winter was not simply uncomfortable. Without modern heating or electricity, the cold could become a real threat to survival. Firewood was precious, food was limited, and even sleep could be difficult as freezing air crept through the cracks of their homes. And yet, for centuries, ordinary people managed to endure these harsh winters using simple but surprisingly clever ways to stay warm. Imagine the silence of the village at this hour. The only sounds are the crunch of snow beneath boots, the distant howl of wolves beyond the forest, and the faint crackle of firewood burning inside a hearth. The air is sharp, biting, and unforgiving. Every breath turns to mist, drifting upward before vanishing into the night. Step closer to one of these cottages. Its walls are made of timber, patched with mud and straw. The roof is heavy with snow, sagging under the weight of winter. A thin stream of smoke rises from the chimney, curling into the dark sky. Inside, a family huddles together, their faces lit by the dim glow of firelight. The father tends the flames, carefully feeding the hearth with the last of the day's wood. The mother wraps her children in layers of wool and linen, whispering prayers that the fire will last until morning. The children, tired but restless, watch the shadows dance across the walls, their imaginations filling the silence. This is not a night of comfort. It is a night of endurance. Every decision, how much wood to burn, how much food to eat, carries weight. To waste resources is to risk tomorrow. To conserve too much is to suffer tonight. Survival is a delicate balance. Outside, the village lies in stillness. The fields are buried beneath snow, the wells frozen, the barns silent. The animals, once lively, now stand quietly in their stalls, their breath rising in clouds of steam. Winter has claimed the land, and the people retreat into their homes, waiting for dawn. Yet there is beauty in this silence. The stars shine brighter in the cold, their light piercing the darkness. The snow glitters like silver beneath the moon. The air, though harsh, carries a purity that feels timeless. In this frozen world, life slows, and every moment becomes sharper, deeper, more vivid. As we begin this journey, remember, these peasants were not helpless. They were resourceful and resilient. Their survival depended on knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge of fire, food, and community. Tonight, we will uncover those secrets until we understand how they endured the coldest nights. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's step quietly into a freezing medieval night. The first signs of winter in a medieval village were subtle, almost whispered. A chill in the morning air, frost clinging to the edges of wooden fences, the slow fading of green fields into muted shades of brown. But soon, the whispers became a roar. The winds grew sharper, the skies heavy with clouds. Picture the village as dusk settles. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling into the gray sky. The marketplace, once bustling, now stands empty, its stalls abandoned. The roads, narrow and uneven, are already slick with ice, and the sound of footsteps grows rare. Winter has arrived, with a sense of dread and quiet acceptance. For peasants, the arrival of winter was a certainty. They had watched the seasons shift, prepared as best they could, and now faced long months ahead. The fields now lay barren beneath frost. The rivers slowed, their surfaces hardening into sheets of ice. The forest became a source of firewood and danger. Inside the cottages, families gathered close. The walls offered little protection against the cold. Every crack in the timber let in a draft. The peasants knew that survival depended not on comfort, but on endurance. Winter was a test, and every household had to face it with courage. Work in the fields ceased, replaced by tasks of survival. Firewood had to be rationed, food carefully stored, clothing layered and repaired. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and time itself seemed to stretch, each hour marked by the struggle to stay warm. Yet there was a strange beauty in this season. The snow transformed the village into a quiet wonderland. Roofs glistened beneath moonlight. Children, despite the cold, found joy in the snow, their laughter echoing faintly through the stillness. Even in hardship, life continued, and the village endured. The peasants understood winter was both enemy and companion. It brought hunger and danger, but it also bound families together, forced communities to rely on one another. As the first heavy snow fell, blanketing the land in white, the village seemed to disappear into silence. The roads vanished, the fields became indistinguishable. The peasants knew the world outside was now hostile, and so they turned inward, retreating into the warmth of firelight, preparing for the long nights ahead. The arrival of winter was the beginning of a story of endurance, of resourcefulness, of quiet struggle against the cold. And so, as the snow continued to fall, the medieval village settled into its winter rhythm. The fires burned, the families huddled, and the land lay silent. Winter had arrived, and the peasants prepared to endure its long, unforgiving embrace. Step inside a medieval peasant's home on a winter's night, and you will immediately feel the cold pressing in from every side. These cottages were built quickly, cheaply, and with little thought for warmth. Their walls, made of rough timber or wattle and daub, a mixture of sticks, mud, and straw, cracked icily, allowing icy drafts to slip through. The roof, often thatched with reeds, sagged under the weight of snow, and gaps between the layers let the wind whistle inside. The floor was nothing more than packed earth, hard and damp, sometimes covered with straw to soften the surface. But straw could not stop the chill rising from the ground. Every step carried the sensation of cold seeping upward. The single door, made of wood planks bound together, rarely fit snugly into its frame. It rattled when the wind blew. Windows were small openings covered with oiled cloth or thin wooden shutters. Glass was a luxury peasants could not afford. These coverings did little to block the cold, and the air inside the cottage was never truly still. Imagine the family gathered in the main room. The hearth glows faintly, but its warmth does not reach far. Shadows stretch across the walls, and the corners of the room remain icy. The children huddle together. Their breath is visible in the dim light. The parents sit close to the fire, their faces lined with worry. They know that the flames are their only defense against the night. The poor insulation meant every winter was a battle. The cold crept through cracks, seeped through walls, and lingered in the air. Even with a fire, warmth was fleeting. The peasants learned to live with this discomfort, layering clothing, sharing beds, and relying on body heat to survive. The walls themselves told stories of struggle. Smoke from the hearth stained them black, the scent of wood clinging to everything. The ceilings were low, trapping smoke that often filled the room, stinging eyes and lungs. Yet even this smoke was a kind of protection, sealing cracks with soot, slowing the invasion of cold. The furniture was sparse, a wooden table, a few stools, perhaps a chest for storage. Beds were simple frames filled with straw, covered with animal skins or rough blankets. Nothing in the room offered comfort against the cold. Every object was functional, chosen for survival rather than luxury. Outside, the snow piled against the walls, pressing inward, threatening to collapse the fragile structures. The villagers knew that their homes were vulnerable, that a storm could damage roofs or flood floors with melting ice. Repairs were constant, but resources were scarce. A broken wall might be patched with mud, but nothing could truly seal it. And yet, despite their poor insulation, these homes were sanctuaries. They offered shelter from the wind. The peasants accepted the flaws, endured the drafts, and found ways to adapt. Their resilience turned fragile cottages into fortresses of survival, however imperfect. The poor insulation reminds us of the fragility of medieval life. Comfort was rare, warmth fleeting. These cottages were built to provide just enough shelter to make survival possible. As the night deepened, the family inside the cottage pulled closer to the fire, listening to the wind howl outside. The walls creaked, the roof groaned, and the cold pressed in. But within those fragile walls, life endured. Long before the first snow fell, medieval peasants knew that winter was coming. The rhythm of the seasons was etched into their lives, and preparation was not a choice, but a necessity. As autumn faded, the village shifted into a quiet urgency, every family working tirelessly to gather what they needed to survive. Imagine the fields after harvest. The golden crops have been cut, bundled, and stored. The land lies bare, its bounty taken, its soil resting beneath the chill of late autumn. Peasants move quickly, carrying sacks of grain into storage, stacking bundles of straw, and sealing cellars with clay to keep out dampness. Every grain, every vegetable, every piece of firewood is precious. Waste is unthinkable. The cottages buzz with activity. Women preserve food, drying herbs and salting meat. Clay jars are filled with beans and peas, baskets lined with straw to protect fragile roots. Children help where they can, gathering kindling, carrying water, or weaving straw mats to cover the floors. Even the smallest hands have a role, for survival depends on the effort of all. Outside, men venture into the forest to gather wood. The sound of axes echoes through the trees, sharp and rhythmic. Logs are cut, split, and stacked carefully, each piece destined for the hearth. Firewood is more than warmth. It is life itself. Without it, the nights would be unbearable, the cold merciless. Every log must be counted, every pile guarded. The animals, too, must be prepared. Cows, goats, and chickens are brought closer to the cottages. Their survival ensures milk, eggs, and meat through the winter. Peasants spread hay across the floors of barns, patch holes in walls, and pray that the animals will endure the cold. A dead cow is a loss of livelihood. Clothing is repaired and layered. Woolen garments are patched, linen shirts reinforced, and cloaks lined with fur. Shoes are stuffed with straw to keep feet warm. gloves sewn from scraps of leather. Nothing is wasted. The village itself prepares as a community. Neighbors share tools, exchange food, and help repair cottages. The church stores offerings, ready to aid those who falter. The marketplace slows, but trade continues quietly. Winter is not faced alone. It is endured together. Yet, beneath this preparation lies tension. No matter how much is gathered, it never feels enough. Storms can last for weeks, and firewood can run out. Every family carries the weight of uncertainty, the fear that their efforts may not be sufficient. The cold is relentless, and survival is never guaranteed. Still, there is a quiet determination in their work. The peasants have faced winter before, and they will face it again. Their hands are calloused, their spirits endure. Preparation is a ritual of resilience, a reminder that life continues even in the harshest of seasons. As the last days of autumn fade, the village stands ready. The granaries are full, the woodpiles stacked, the cottages patched, the animals sheltered. The peasants gather around their hearths, listening to the wind, watching the skies darken, waiting for the first snow to fall. Winter is coming. The preparations are complete. And now the true test begins. Step into the dim interior of a peasant's cottage, and your eyes are immediately drawn to the hearth. It is the heart of the home, the single source of warmth, light, and comfort during the long winter nights. Without it, the cottage would be nothing more than a shell against the cold. With it, life endures. The fireplace is simple, often little more than a hollow space built into the wall or a circle of stones set upon the earth floor. There is no grand chimney, no ornate mantel. Smoke curls upward, sometimes escaping through a hole in the roof. The peasants accept this discomfort, for the fire is their lifeline. The hearth burns with wood gathered from the forest, carefully rationed to last through the season. Each log is chosen with care, each ember tended with patience. The fire must never be allowed to die. The father watches the flames closely, feeding them sparingly, ensuring that the fire burns steadily through the night. Around the hearth, life unfolds. The mother cooks meals in iron pots, hanging them above the flames. The children sit close, their faces glowing in the flickering light, their bodies warmed by the heat. The family gathers here not only for warmth, but for companionship, for the hearth is the center of their world. The fire itself is alive, its crackle and hiss filling the silence of the cottage. Shadows dance across the walls, shifting with every flicker of flame. The peasants watch these shadows, their imaginations weaving stories of spirits and creatures. The fireplace is also a place of danger. Sparks leap from the flames, threatening to ignite the straw. Smoke fills the room, choking lungs and blackening walls. The peasants know that fire is both friend and enemy. Despite its simplicity, the hearth carries a sense of sacredness. It is the place where prayers are whispered. The fire is not only physical but spiritual, a symbol of endurance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. As the night deepens, the hearth glows steadily. The family huddles close, listening to the wind howl outside. The cottage may be fragile, the walls thin, but within the circle of firelight there is safety. The medieval fireplace reminds us of the fragility of life. Comfort was rare, and survival depended on the steady glow of flames. It was the heart of the home, the guardian of the family, the light that carried them through the darkest nights. And so, as the snow falls outside and the cold presses in, The peasants sit by their hearth, finding solace in the miracle of fire. The forest was the lifeline of the medieval village, and as winter approached, its silent trees became the most precious guardians of survival. Firewood was not simply fuel, it was warmth, protection, and the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. Picture the peasants venturing out at dawn, their breath misting in the frozen air. The ground is already hard beneath their boots, frost clinging to every blade of grass. The forest looms ahead, dark and endless, its branches heavy with the weight of early snow. The men carry axes, their handles worn smooth from years of use, while children trail behind, gathering fallen sticks and kindling. The task is urgent. Once the snow deepens, the forest will become treacherous, paths hidden, dangers multiplied. Wolves prowl in the shadows, and the cold itself becomes an enemy. Firewood must be gathered now, before the land is swallowed by ice. The sound of axes echoes through the trees, sharp, rhythmic, relentless. Each strike sends splinters flying, each fallen log a victory against the coming cold. The peasants work quickly, their hands numb, their bodies weary, but their determination unshaken. They know that every piece of wood is a promise of warmth, a shield against the night. Logs are cut, split, and stacked carefully. The strongest pieces are reserved for the hearth, where they will burn slowly through the night. Smaller branches are bundled for kindling, ready to spark the flames. Children gather twigs, filling baskets with the smallest fragments, their laughter mingling with the crack of axes. Even in hardship, there is a rhythm, a sense of purpose that binds the family together. The forest itself seems to resist their efforts. The wind howls through the branches, snow drifts silently from above, and the shadows stretch long and ominous. Yet the peasants press on, guided by instinct, driven by necessity. They know the dangers, but they also know the rewards. Without firewood, the hearth will die, and the cottage will freeze. Back in the village, the woodpiles grow. Stacks of logs lean against cottages, bundles of kindling fill corners. The air carries the scent of freshly cut timber. Families count their supplies carefully, measuring each pile against the long months ahead. Too little, and the fire will falter. Too much, and the effort may have cost them dearly. Balance is everything. The gathering of firewood is more than labor. It is ritual. Each strike of the axe, each bundle carried home, is an act of preparation, a gesture of resilience. The peasants do not see the wood as mere fuel, but as lifelines, as guardians of warmth, as companions through the darkest nights. As evening falls, the forest grows silent once more. The peasants return to their cottages, their arms heavy with wood, their bodies aching from the day's work. The fires are lit, the flames crackle, and the warmth spreads slowly through the room. Outside, the snow begins to fall in earnest, covering the land in white. But inside, the hearth glows, and the family gathers close, comforted by the knowledge that they have prepared well. Gathering firewood before the snow was not simply survival, it was hope. It was the promise that even in the harshest of winters, the peasants could endure. The forest gave them strength, the fire gave them life, and together they faced the cold with quiet determination. In the medieval cottage, the fire was more than warmth. It was survival itself. A single flame, flickering in the hearth, carried the weight of an entire family's fate. To let it die was to invite the cold inside, to surrender to the long, merciless night. Imagine the cottage at midnight. The wind howls outside, rattling the wooden door, pressing against the fragile walls. Snow drifts against the roof, heavy and silent. Inside, the family sleeps uneasily, their bodies curled together beneath layers of wool and straw. The hearth glows faintly, embers pulsing like the heartbeat of the home. The father stirs, rising quietly to feed the fire. He knows that if the flames fade, the cold will creep in, and the family will wake shivering, their breath thick in the air. The fire must be constant. It cannot falter, cannot fail. Every ember is precious, every spark a promise of survival. The peasants learned to tend the flames with care, feeding them slowly, conserving wood, coaxing the fire to last through the endless night. They knew the rhythm of the hearth, the language of smoke and flame, the delicate balance between too much and too little. The constant fire was more than heat, it was protection. The flames kept dampness at bay, drying the air, warding off illness. They kept predators from approaching, their glow a warning in the darkness. They gave light to the cottage, guiding hands and eyes, turning shadows into companions rather than threats. Without the fire, the night was absolute, a void of cold and silence. The peasants treated the fire with reverence. It was tended like a living creature, fed, nurtured, and guarded. Children were taught from an early age to respect the flames, to never waste wood, to never leave the hearth unattended. The fire was not only physical but spiritual, a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even in the harshest winter, life could persist. Yet the fire carried danger. Sparks leaped from the hearth, threatening to ignite the straw that covered the floor. Smoke filled the room, choking lungs, blackening walls. The peasants lived with this risk, knowing that the fire was both friend and enemy. They accepted its dual nature, for without it, survival was impossible. The importance of a constant fire shaped every aspect of life. Families rationed wood carefully, measuring each log against the nights ahead. They built routines around the hearth, waking at intervals to feed the flames, sleeping lightly to listen for its crackle. The fire became the rhythm of the household, the pulse of survival, the center of existence. As dawn approached, the fire still glowed, its embers steady, its warmth lingering. The family stirred, grateful for its endurance, comforted by its presence. Outside, the world remained frozen, silent, and hostile. But inside, the hearth had carried them through, its constant flame, a shield against the night. The importance of a constant fire reminds us of the fragility of medieval life. Survival depended not on grand structures or wealth, but on the steady glow of flames, the careful tending of embers, the quiet resilience of families who refused to let the cold claim them. The fire was not luxury, but necessity, not decoration, but salvation. And so, as the snow continued to fall and the nights grew longer, the peasants kept their fires burning, their hearths glowing, their spirits enduring. The constant fire was their guardian, their companion, their hope. Without it, they would not survive. With it, they faced the winter with quiet strength. As the fire glowed faintly in the hearth, the family prepared for sleep. In a medieval peasant's cottage, rest was not a luxury, but a fragile pause in the struggle against the cold. The way they arranged themselves at night was as much about survival as it was about comfort. The cottage was small, often a single room where life unfolded from dawn until dusk. There was no separation between kitchen, living space, and sleeping quarters. The hearth stood at the center. Around it, the family spread out their bedding, straw mattresses, animal skins, and rough wool blankets. The floor was hard, the air damp, and the cold pressed in from every side. Yet, within this humble space, the peasants created a fragile sanctuary of warmth. Beds were simple frames filled with straw, sometimes nothing more than piles of hay spread across the earth floor. The straw was replaced when it grew damp, but in winter it was layered thickly, a barrier against the chill. On top, animal skins, sheep, goat, or cowhide, added warmth, their coarse texture a reminder of the animals. Families slept close together. Parents and children shared the same bed, their bodies pressed tightly, their breath mingling in the cold air. This closeness was not only affection, but necessity. Body heat was the most reliable source of warmth, and to sleep apart was to risk freezing. Even older children understood the importance of huddling together. Survival outweighed pride. The sleeping arrangements reflected the rhythm of the household. The youngest children were placed nearest the fire, their small bodies shielded by parents. The elders took the outer edges, their bodies forming a protective barrier against drafts. Everyone had a place, everyone a role, and together they created a fragile cocoon of warmth. The nights were long, and sleep was uneasy. The wind howled outside, rattling the door. The fire crackled, its light flickering across the room. Shadows danced on the walls, filling the silence. The peasants drifted in and out of sleep, waking often to feed the fire, to adjust blankets, to listen for dangers beyond the cottage. Privacy was unknown. In a single-room home, every sound, every movement was shared. Families accepted this closeness, for it was the rhythm of survival. The bonds of kinship were strengthened in these nights, as warmth and safety depended on togetherness. The sleeping arrangements also carried a sense of vulnerability. The straw mattresses were rough, the blankets thin, the air heavy with smoke. Illness spread easily in such close quarters, and the dampness often worsened coughs. Yet the peasants endured, for there was no alternative. To sleep was to surrender to necessity, to trust that the family's closeness would carry them through. Imagine the silence of the cottage once the family settled. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The children breathe softly, their faces peaceful despite the cold. The parents lie awake, listening to the wind, their thoughts heavy with worry for the days ahead. Outside, the world is frozen, but inside, within the fragile circle of warmth, life endures. The sleeping arrangements of medieval peasants remind us of the resilience of ordinary people. They had no luxury, no comfort, no privacy, yet they found ways to adapt and survive. Their nights were long, their beds humble, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the snow fell outside and the cold pressed in, the peasants slept together, their bodies forming a fragile fortress against the night. Within their humble cottage, they found warmth in the closeness of family, in the quiet strength of togetherness. When the fire dimmed and the night grew colder, medieval peasants turned to the simplest, most human form of survival, sharing beds. In cottages where insulation was poor and blankets scarce, warmth was not found in solitude but in closeness. Picture the family settling down for the night. The straw mattress is spread across the floor, layered with animal skins and rough wool blankets. There is no luxury here, no feather beds or silken sheets. Instead, the family presses together, their bodies forming a fragile fortress against the cold. Parents, children, and sometimes even grandparents share the same space, their breath mingling in the icy air. This closeness was not only practical but essential. Body heat was the most reliable source of warmth, and to sleep apart was to risk freezing. The youngest children were nestled between parents, shielded from drafts by the warmth of adult bodies. Older children curled beside siblings, their small frames pressed tightly together. Even neighbors or visiting relatives might share the same bed, for survival outweighed modesty. The act of sharing beds carried a rhythm. Families arranged themselves carefully, knowing which positions offered the most warmth. The outer edges were reserved for the strongest, those who could endure the cold pressing in from the walls. The center was for the vulnerable, the youngest, the weakest, the sick. In this arrangement, the family became a living shield. The nights were long, and sleep was restless. The fire flickered, casting shadows across the walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the door, pressing against the fragile roof. Inside, the family lay close, listening to the crackle of embers, feeling the warmth of one another's bodies. The cold was relentless, but together they endured. Sharing beds also carried a sense of intimacy. In the silence of the night, families whispered stories, sang lullabies, or prayed quietly. The closeness fostered bonds, strengthened trust, and reminded everyone that survival was not an individual struggle, but a collective one. The warmth of the bed was more than physical. It was emotional, a comfort against the fear of the night. Yet this closeness had its challenges. Privacy was non-existent, and illness spread easily in such tight quarters. Coughs and fevers passed from one body to another, and the dampness of the cottage often worsened sickness. Still, the peasants accepted these risks, for the alternative, isolation in the cold, was far more dangerous. Imagine the silence once the family settled. The children breathe softly, their faces peaceful despite the cold. The parents lie awake, listening to the wind, their thoughts heavy with worry for the days ahead. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in white. Inside, within the fragile circle of warmth, life endures. Sharing beds for warmth was not luxury, but necessity. It was the simplest, most human solution to the relentless cold. It reminds us that survival often depends not on grand structures or wealth, but on closeness, on trust, on the quiet strength of togetherness. And so, as the night deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants slept side by side, their bodies forming a fragile fortress against the winter. Within their humble cottage, they found warmth not only in fire and blankets, but in one another, in the quiet resilience of family. When the fire dimmed and the family pressed together for warmth, their fragile beds became the last defense against the cold. In a medieval peasant's cottage, sleep was taken upon humble foundations, straw mattresses, and animal skins, layered to keep the icy air at bay. Picture the floor of the cottage. It is hard, packed earth, damp from the winter frost. To lie directly upon it would be unbearable, the chill rising through the body until sleep was impossible. And so, peasants spread straw across the ground, weaving it into rough mats or piling it thickly into wooden frames. The straw was coarse, prickly, and often carried the scent of the fields, but it offered insulation, a fragile barrier between flesh and frozen soil. The mattress was never soft. It rustled with every movement, shifting beneath the weight of bodies. Over time, it grew damp. Yet, for peasants, it was indispensable. Without straw, the night would be merciless. On top of the straw, animal skins were laid. Sheep hides, goat skins, or cow hides stretched across the bedding, their rough texture softened by use. These skins, carried the warmth of the animals that had once lived. They were heavy, durable, and precious, often passed down through generations. Each hide represented a sacrifice, an animal that had fed the family, clothed them, and now offered warmth in death. To sleep beneath these skins was to be reminded of the fragile bond between humans and animals, of the dependence that defined peasant life. The bedding was arranged carefully, straw at the bottom, skins above, and wool blankets layered on top if fortune allowed. Families pressed together upon this fragile foundation, their bodies forming a living shield against the cold. The rustle of straw mingled with the crackle of the fire, the coarse texture of skins pressed against weary limbs. Sleep was not comfort but necessity, a surrender to exhaustion in the midst of hardship. Yet even in this simplicity there was intimacy. The straw carried the scent of harvest, the skins, the memory of animals, the blankets, the touch of human hands. The bed was a tapestry of survival, woven from the land, the animals, and the labor of the family. It was not luxury, but it was life. The peasants accepted the flaws. They endured the prickling of straw, the heaviness of skins, the dampness of blankets. They knew that sleep was fragile, that comfort was rare, that survival depended on endurance, and so they lay together, listening to the wind outside, trusting that the straw and skins would carry them through the night. Imagine the silence once the family settled. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The children breathe softly, their faces peaceful despite the cold. The parents lie awake, their thoughts heavy with worry. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in white. Inside, upon straw and skins, life endures. The straw mattresses and animal skins remind us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no feather beds, no silken sheets, yet they found ways to endure, to adapt, to survive. Their beds were humble, their nights long, but their spirits remained strong. As the winter deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants found warmth, not in comfort, but in endurance and resilience. Within their humble cottage, they found the will to survive another day, protected by the very earth and animals they tended. As the fire flickered low and the cold pressed against the fragile walls of the cottage, the peasants turned to their clothing as armor. In a world without central heating, without thick insulation, every garment was a shield, every layer a fragile defense against the relentless winter. Picture the family preparing for sleep. Their bodies are wrapped in wool and linen, garments patched and worn, yet layered carefully to trap warmth. The father wears a heavy tunic, its coarse fibers rough against his skin. He is weary but determined, his hands stained with soot. The mother pulls a cloak around her shoulders, lined with scraps of fur. Her expression is focused as she secures her headcloth. The children are bundled in shirts and stockings, their small frames hidden beneath layers of cloth, eyes reflecting the dying firelight. Wool was the most precious material. Spun from sheep, it carried warmth even when damp, its fibers thick and resilient. Cloaks, tunics, and hoods were fashioned from wool, dyed in muted colors, and repaired endlessly when torn over many winters. Linen, lighter and less protective, was worn beneath, a base layer against the skin. Together, these fabrics formed a fragile barrier. Shoes were simple, often made of leather, stuffed with straw to insulate against the frozen ground that seeped cold through the floor. Gloves were rare, but hands were wrapped in cloth or covered with scraps of hide. Hoods protected heads where warmth escaped quickly. Every garment was functional, every piece of cloth a tool of survival. The clothing carried the marks of deep hardship. Tunics were patched with mismatched fabrics, cloaks frayed at the edges. Yet the peasants accepted these flaws, for the garments endured. Each stitch was a reminder of resilience, each patch a testament to survival through the long, dark season. The layering of clothing was deliberate. Peasants understood the rhythm of warmth, the importance of trapping air between fabrics. Linen against the skin, wool above, fur, if available, cloaks to seal the layers. The garments were heavy and cumbersome. To dress lightly was to invite the cold, to risk illness, to surrender to the night. Survival depended on these heavy shrouds. Clothing was also communal. Families shared garments, passing cloaks from one to another, wrapping children in the same layers worn by parents. Neighbors exchanged scraps of cloth and ensured that no one faced the winter unprotected. Clothing was community, a bond woven into fabric. Imagine the cottage at night. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The family huddles together, wrapped in wool and linen. The garments are heavy, the air still cold, but within these layers there is warmth. The peasants endure, their clothing carrying them through. This clothing reminds us of the fragility of life. There was no luxury, no abundance, yet the peasants found ways to adapt. Their garments were humble, their layers heavy, but their spirits remained strong against the frozen stillness of the medieval night. As the snow fell and the cold pressed in, they wrapped themselves in wool, their clothing a fragile fortress against the winter. Within their humble cottage, they found warmth, not in luxury, but in resilience, not in abundance, but in endurance. Medieval peasants turned to an unlikely source of warmth: their animals. In cottages, where insulation was poor and blankets scarce, the presence of living creatures became a vital part of survival. Picture the cottage at night. The family huddles near the hearth. Beside them, in the shadows, animals, sturgeons clucking softly, goats shifting on straw, perhaps even a cow resting heavily against the wall. The cottage is not only a home for people, but a shelter for beasts, their warmth mingling with the fire's glow. To lose them was to lose sustenance, and so they were brought inside, their bodies serving as living furnaces against the cold. The warmth they gave was subtle but vital. A cow's heavy body radiated heat, filling the room with a quiet presence. Chickens nestled together, their feathers insulating the air. Goats huddled near the family, their breath rising in clouds of steam. The cottage, though cramped and smoky, became a shared sanctuary where humans and animals endured the night together. The arrangement carried a rhythm. Animals were placed near the walls, their straw bedding layered thickly to absorb dampness. The family slept closer to the fire, their bodies pressed together, their warmth mingling with that of the beasts. The sounds of the cottage were a chorus: the crackle of flames, the rustle of straw, the soft breathing of animals, the whispers of children. Yet this closeness carried challenges. The air grew heavy with the scent of animals, the floor damp with straw and waste. Illness spread easily, and the smoke from the hearth mingled with the musk of beasts, choking lungs and stinging eyes. Still, the peasants accepted these discomforts, for the warmth was worth the risk. Survival demanded sacrifice. The presence of animals also carried a sense of companionship. In the silence of the night, their steady breathing was a comfort. The children sleep soundly, their faces peaceful despite the cold. The cow shifts in the corner, its breath rising in mist. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in silence. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth, life endures. Bringing animals inside the house for heat reminds us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no luxury, no abundance, no comfort, yet they found ways to adapt, to endure, to survive. Their cottages were cramped, their nights long, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the winter deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants shared their homes with animals, their warmth mingling. As the snow thickened and the nights grew longer, medieval peasants turned their attention to another battle for survival. Food, fire kept them warm, clothing shielded their bodies. Animals shared their homes, but without food, none of it mattered. The art of storing provisions through the winter was a delicate balance of knowledge, patience, and sheer necessity. Picture the cottage at dusk. The hearth glows faintly, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough stone walls. In the corner, clay jars line the shelves, their lids sealed tightly with wax or thick linen cloth. Baskets of root vegetables rest upon dry straw, their skins hardened against the biting cold of the winter months. Hanging from the rafters, strips of dried meat sway gently, preserved with salt and the faint scent of wood smoke. Every item has its place, every morsel guarded carefully, for waste could mean hunger, and hunger could mean death. Grain was the foundation. Wheat, barley, and rye were stored in sacks or wooden bins, kept dry and safe from rodents. These grains could be ground into flour, baked into bread, or boiled into hearty porridge to feed the family. They were the lifeblood of the peasant diet, the fuel that carried families through the long, dark months. To lose grain to dampness or pests was a disaster, and so peasants watched their stores carefully, patching sacks and sealing bins. Vegetables were preserved in cellars, buried beneath earth and straw to keep them cool and dry throughout the winter. Carrots, turnips, and parsnips endured the winter well, their hardy skins resisting the rot that claimed softer foods. Cabbages were hung upside down, their leaves curling inward, their cores lasting for many weeks in the cold air. Onions and garlic were braided and hung from beams, their pungent scent filling the cottage, a promise of flavor and medicine. Meat was rare but precious. When an animal was slaughtered, its flesh was salted, smoked, or dried for the long cold. The process was laborious, the flavor harsh, but the meat lasted, offering sustenance when fresh food was scarce. Bones were boiled into broth, fat rendered into tallow, every part used, nothing wasted in the fight for survival. Dairy was fleeting, milk soured quickly, but peasants turned it into cheese, pressing curds into wheels that lasted months. Butter was salted and stored in jars, its richness preserved against the cold, a rare treat for the family. These foods carried not only nourishment but comfort, their taste a reminder of summer's abundance during the freezing nights. Herbs and spices, though rare, were treasured. dried mint, sage, or thyme hung in bundles, their leaves crumbling slowly. They were used sparingly to season food, soothe illness, and remind families of warmer days long gone. The storage of food was not only practical but ritual. Families gathered to preserve, to seal, and to store together. Children learned the importance of careful handling, of patience, and of respect for the precious harvest. Every jar, every sack, every bundle was a lifeline, a promise that the cold of tomorrow could be endured. Yet beneath this preparation lay tension. No matter how much was stored, it never felt quite enough to be safe. The peasants knew that storms could last for weeks, that illness could strike, and that hunger could gnaw at their strength. Every family carried the weight of uncertainty, the constant fear that their stores might fail before spring arrived. Still, there was resilience in their work. The peasants had faced winter before, and they would face it again. Their cellars were filled, their jars sealed, and their baskets lined with straw against the freezing night. They endured not through abundance, but through careful preparation, through patience and the quiet strength of endurance. Imagine the silence of the cottage once the food was stored. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The jars rest upon shelves, the baskets upon straw, the meat upon beams in the deep of the night. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in silence. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth, life endures. Food storage during winter reminds us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no luxury, no abundance, no comfort, yet they found ways to adapt, to endure, to survive. Their cellars were humble, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the winter deepened, the peasants turned to their food stores, their jars and baskets, their salted meat. Within their humble cottages, they found survival, not in abundance, but in resilience, not in comfort, but in endurance. When the cold pressed hardest against the fragile walls of the cottage, when the fire burned low and the night seemed endless, medieval peasants turned to the comfort of warm meals. Food was not only sustenance, it was warmth from within, a fragile shield against the icy air that crept through every crack. Picture the family gathered around the hearth. The mother stirs a pot suspended above the flames, the steam rising in soft curls, filling the room with a scent both humble and comforting. The children watch eagerly, their faces glowing in the firelight, their stomachs aching with hunger. The father waits quietly, his hands rough from work, his eyes fixed on the simmering broth. In this moment, the meal is more than food, it is hope. The dishes were simple, born of necessity. Thick porridges made from barley or oats, boiled slowly until they softened into a heavy paste. Soups crafted from root vegetables, carrots, turnips, parsnips, simmered with herbs, their flavors mingling in the pot. Bread, coarse and dark, baked from stored grain, dipped into broth to soften its hardness. These meals carried no luxury, no abundance, but they filled the belly and warmed the body. Meat was rare, but when it appeared, it was treasured. A strip of salted pork, a piece of dried beef, or a bone boiled into broth transformed the meal into something richer, more sustaining. Fat rendered from animals was added to soups, its richness spreading warmth through the body. Even the smallest scrap was used, nothing wasted, every morsel valued. Cheese and butter, preserved from autumn, added comfort. A piece of cheese melted into porridge. A spoonful of butter stirred into broth. These small additions carried a taste of summer, a reminder of abundance in the midst of scarcity. Herbs, dried and stored, were sprinkled sparingly, their flavors subtle but soothing. The act of eating together was as important as the food itself. Families gathered close, their bodies warmed not only by the fire, but by the steam rising from the pot. The children ate quickly, their hunger insistent. The parents ate slowly, measuring each bite, ensuring that the food lasted, that tomorrow would not be empty. The meal was shared carefully, each portion deliberate, each mouthful a reminder of survival. Warm meals carried a rhythm. Breakfast was often simple: bread, porridge, perhaps a bit of cheese. Dinner, taken at dusk, was heavier, a soup or stew simmered through the day. Supper, before sleep, was light, perhaps a piece of bread dipped in broth, enough to quiet hunger before the long night. The peasants understood the importance of timing, of balance, of conserving food while sustaining strength. The warmth of these meals was more than physical. It was emotional, a comfort against the fear of the night. The steam rising from the pot filled the cottage with a sense of safety. The flavors carried memories of harvest. The act of eating together strengthened bonds. In the silence of winter, the meal became a ritual, a reminder that life endured. Imagine the cottage once the meal was finished. The pot rests empty, its sides blackened by smoke. The children sleep soundly, their stomachs full, their faces peaceful. The parents sit quietly, their bodies weary but comforted by the warmth of food. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in silence. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth and sustenance, life endures. Warm meals that helped people survive remind us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no luxury, no abundance, no comfort, yet they found ways to adapt, to endure, to survive. Their meals were humble, their flavors simple, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the winter deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants turned to their warm meals, their porridges and soups, their bread and cheese. Within their humble cottages, they found survival, not in abundance, but in resilience, not in comfort, but in endurance. When the last meal was finished and the fire burned low, the medieval cottage sank into silence. Outside, the world was swallowed by darkness, the snow falling steadily, the wind howling through the trees. Inside, the family lay together, their bodies pressed close, their breath misting in the cold air. The long, dark nights of winter had begun. These nights were endless, stretching far beyond the hours we know today. With no clocks, no lamps, no electricity, time was measured by the fire's glow, by the slow movement of stars across the sky. The darkness was absolute, pressing against the fragile walls, filling the cottage with a sense of isolation. The peasants endured, their lives suspended between the flicker of flames and the silence of night. Sleep came in fragments. Families drifted in and out of slumber, waking often to feed the fire, to adjust blankets. They listened for dangers beyond the door. The wind rattled the shutters, the roof groaned beneath snow, and the cold crept through every crack. Dreams were uneasy, filled with shadows and whispers, shaped by the fear of the night. The darkness carried mystery. Shadows danced across the walls, their shapes shifting with every flicker of flame. Children imagined spirits moving through the cottage, creatures lurking in the corners, unseen forces watching from the forest. Parents whispered prayers, their voices soft, their words carried into the silence. The night was not only cold, but haunted, filled with the unknown. Yet within this darkness, there was also intimacy. Families spoke quietly, sharing stories, singing lullabies, comforting one another. The silence of the night became a canvas for memory, for imagination, for the bonds of kinship. The long hours were endured not only through fire and blankets, but through closeness, through the quiet strength of togetherness. The nights were dangerous. Illness spread easily in the damp air. Fevers worsened in the cold, and hunger gnawed at the body. The fire could falter, the roof could collapse, the animals could sicken. Every hour carried risk, every moment a reminder of fragility. Yet the peasants endured, their resilience carrying them through the endless dark. Imagine the cottage at midnight. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The children sleep soundly, their faces peaceful despite the cold. The parents lie awake, listening to the wind, their thoughts heavy with worry. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in silence. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth, life endures. The long dark nights of winter remind us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no lamps, no clocks, no comfort, yet they found ways to adapt, to endure, to survive. Their nights were long, their darkness absolute, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the winter deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants faced the long dark nights with quiet strength. Within their humble cottages, they found survival not in abundance, but in resilience, not in comfort, but in endurance. The long nights of winter carried more than silence and cold. They carried danger, invisible, creeping, relentless. For medieval peasants, illness was a shadow that lingered in every breath, every cough, every shiver. The cold was not only discomfort, it was a threat that weakened the body and tested the fragile resilience of families. Picture the cottage at midnight. The fire glows faintly, embers pulsing like stars. The family huddles together, their bodies pressed close, their breath misting in the icy air. One child coughs softly, the sound echoing in the silence. The parents stir worry etched into their faces. They know that illness spreads quickly in the damp air, that fevers worsen in the cold, that survival is fragile. Frostbite crept into fingers and toes, numbing flesh. Pneumonia struck lungs, weakened by smoke and dampness. Hunger weakened the body further, leaving it vulnerable to every sickness. The cold itself was merciless. It seeped through walls, pressed against the skin, slowed the blood, dulled the senses. Sleep became dangerous, for the body cooled too quickly. Parents watched their children carefully, ensuring the fire never died. Smoke from the hearth filled the air, choking lungs. Dampness rose from the earth floor, worsening coughs. Yet the peasants endured. They turned to simple remedies, herbs dried in autumn, teas brewed from mint or sage. They whispered prayers, seeking protection from unseen forces, trusting in faith as much as in medicine. They wrapped the sick in blankets, pressed them close to the fire, and hoped that strength would return. The dangers of illness carried fear, but also resilience. Families learned to adapt, to endure, to care for one another. Outside, the snow falls steadily, covering the land in silence. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth, life endures. Their nights were long, their dangers many, but their spirits remained strong through the darkest winters. Though the fields lay barren and the nights stretched endlessly, medieval peasants could not afford idleness. Winter brought its own rhythm of labor, a cycle of chores and tasks that demanded constant attention. Survival was not only about enduring the cold, but about maintaining the fragile balance of daily life. Picture the cottage at dawn. The fire is coaxed back to life, embers stirred into flame. The mother begins her work, tending to the hearth, preparing a simple meal of porridge or bread. The father steps outside, his breath misting in the icy air, to check the woodpile, to ensure that the fire will last another day. Children stir from sleep, their small hands ready to help. For every member of the household has a role. The animals must be tended first. Cows, goats, and chickens are fed, their shelters cleaned. Water is carried from frozen wells or streams, the ice broken with axes, the buckets heavy and cold. The animals' survival ensures milk, eggs, and meat, and so their care is constant, their presence a daily responsibility. Inside the cottage, chores continue. Clothing is mended, patched with scraps of cloth, reinforced with stitches. Tools are repaired, sharpened, prepared for the work that will resume in spring. Food stores are checked, jars sealed, sacks inspected, baskets rearranged. Every item is precious, every task deliberate, for waste could mean hunger, and hunger could mean death. Children gather kindling, sweep the floor, carry water, or help grind grain into flour. Their laughter mingles with the crackle of the fire, their small bodies warmed by the rhythm of work. Even the youngest have tasks, for survival depends on the effort of all. The chores extend beyond the cottage. Men venture into the forest to gather more wood, their axes echoing through the trees. Women walk to neighbors, exchanging goods, sharing news, offering help. The village itself becomes a network of labor, each family contributing, each household enduring together. Winter work is not only physical but spiritual. Families pray at the hearth, whispering words of hope, seeking strength from faith. The church remains a center of community, its doors open, its offerings shared. The rhythm of chores is punctuated by rituals, by moments of reflection, by the quiet strength of belief. Yet the work is relentless. The cold presses in, the wind howls, the snow deepens. Every task is harder, every chore heavier, every moment a test of endurance. The peasants accept this rhythm, for they know that survival depends not on comfort but on labor, not on ease but on resilience. Imagine the cottage at dusk. The fire glows steadily. The animals rest in their shelters. The food stores are secure. The family gathers around the hearth, their bodies weary but their spirits strong. Outside, the snow falls silently, covering the land in white. Inside, within this fragile circle of warmth and labor, life endures. Winter work and daily chores remind us of the resilience of medieval peasants. They had no luxury, no abundance, no comfort, yet they found ways to adapt, to endure, to survive. Their days were long, their tasks endless, but their spirits remained strong. And so, as the winter deepened and the cold pressed in, the peasants carried on with their work, their chores, their labor. Within their humble cottages, they found survival not in abundance, but in resilience, not in comfort, but in endurance. Winter in medieval villages was not simply a season of cold. It was a test of endurance that no household could face alone. The strength of the community determined whether families survived the long months of scarcity and frost. Cooperation, generosity, and shared labor became the invisible threads that held the village together. Daily life demanded constant exchange. When one family's grain stores ran low, neighbors offered a sack of barley or rye. If another household lacked firewood, men gathered together to split logs and deliver bundles. These acts of sharing were not charity, but necessity. Everyone understood that the survival of one family strengthened the survival of all. Labor was communal. Roofs damaged by snow were repaired by many hands. Paths through frozen fields were cleared together, ensuring access to wells and animal shelters. Women gathered to spin wool, mend clothing, and prepare food, often pooling resources to make meals that could feed several households. Children carried water, collected kindling, and tended animals side by side, learning early that their efforts mattered to the entire community. The church played a central role in reinforcing these bonds. Grain stored from tithes was distributed to those in need, and gatherings for prayer reminded villagers that endurance was collective. Rituals and festivals, even in the bleakest months, offered moments of unity, lifting spirits and reminding everyone that hardship was shared. Emotional support was as vital as physical aid. Families visited one another, telling stories, singing songs, and offering companionship. Loneliness was dangerous, despair heavier than cold, and so the bonds of friendship became lifelines. A neighbor's presence could ease fear, and a shared laugh could soften the weight of hunger. Scarcity sometimes bred tension. Disputes arose when one family seemed better prepared than another, or when envy crept into the fragile balance. Yet, even in conflict, the necessity of cooperation prevailed. The cold was relentless, and division could not be afforded. Community support during harsh winters was both practical and spiritual. It ensured that no family faced the season entirely alone. It strengthened the bonds that defined village life. The rhythm of survival was not found in isolation, but in unity. The peasants understood that winter was not only endured through fire and food, but through trust. Each act of generosity, each shared task, each moment of companionship wove the village into a single fabric of endurance. Their cottages were humble, their resources scarce, but together they created strength greater than the cold. The question of survival in a medieval winter night is not a simple one. It demands imagining yourself stripped of modern comforts. No central heating, no insulated homes, no electric lights, no stocked supermarkets. Survival depended on preparation, resilience, and the collective strength of family. A medieval peasant's cottage was small, drafty, and built from timber, wattle, and daub. The roof leaked, and the floor was packed earth. The hearth was the only source of heat, and its fire had to be tended constantly. Without it, the cold seeped in quickly, numbing fingers. To survive, you would need not only fuel, but the discipline to keep the fire alive through the long hours of darkness. Clothing was another barrier against the cold. Wool tunics, cloaks, and hoods were layered over linen shirts, patched and worn but essential. Shoes were stuffed with straw, hands wrapped in cloth, heads covered with caps. Survival meant embracing the weight of heavy, scratchy garments. Food played a crucial role. A warm meal of porridge, soup, or bread before sleep gave strength to endure the night. Without calories, the body weakened quickly. Medieval families relied on stored grain and root vegetables, rationed carefully to last until spring. The bed was not a soft refuge, but a straw mattress layered with animal skins. Families slept together, pressed close, sharing body heat. Privacy was non-existent, but warmth was found in closeness. If you were unwilling to share space, the cold would claim you. Illness was a constant danger. Smoke from the hearth filled the cottage, and the closeness spread coughs and fevers. Without medicine, survival depended on endurance. A single fever could turn deadly in the cold night. Community bonds mattered as much as fire and food. Neighbors shared resources and offered companionship. Loneliness was dangerous. To survive, you would need not only physical strength, but emotional resilience, the ability to find comfort in shared struggle. So, could you survive a medieval winter night? The answer lies in your willingness to adapt. You would need to keep the fire alive, wear heavy layers, eat simple meals, and sleep pressed against family. Survival was about resilience. For medieval peasants, this was not a question, but a way of life. Their lives were shaped by necessity and spirits hardened by struggle. A medieval winter night was a test of body and spirit. To survive, it meant surrendering comfort and finding strength in unity. It was not easy, not gentle, but it was possible if you carried the resilience of those who lived it every day. As daylight faded early in the depths of winter, medieval life slowed into a rhythm of quiet endurance. The day's labor, tending animals, gathering wood, mending tools, and preparing food, left families weary. By evening, the village settled into stillness, each household retreating to its fragile refuge against the cold. The hearth was the center of the night. Flames burned low, casting a dim glow across rough walls. Families gathered close, not for leisure, but for necessity. The fire was coaxed carefully, its embers stretched to last until morning. Every log was precious, every spark guarded, for without it, the night would be merciless. Meals were simple but comforting. A pot of soup or porridge simmered through the day, its warmth shared among all. Bread was dipped into broth, cheese or butter added if fortune allowed. Eating together was not only nourishment, but ritual, a moment of unity before sleep. Tasks continued even after supper. Clothing was patched, tools sharpened, and food stores checked. Children were given small chores, sweeping, carrying water, or feeding animals before being tucked into straw bedding. Adults spoke quietly, planning for the next day, their voices low against the silence. The cottage grew colder as the fire dimmed. Families layered themselves in wool and linen, pressed close upon straw mattresses covered with animal skins. Privacy was absent, but warmth was found in closeness. Sleep came slowly, broken by the need to tend the fire or soothe restless children. Outside, the village lay in silence, snow-covered paths and rooftops, muffling sound, turning the world into stillness. No lamps lit the streets, no voices carried through the dark. The night belonged to the cold. Only the faint glow of hearths marked the presence of life. The quiet end of a medieval winter day was not peaceful in the modern sense. It was heavy with fatigue, shaped by necessity, and shadowed by the constant threat of hunger or illness. Yet, within that stillness, there was resilience. Families endured together, their bonds strengthened by hardship. For peasants, the close of day was not a time of leisure, but of survival. The fire was guarded, the food rationed, the bedding shared. The silence was not chosen, but imposed by the season. And yet, in that silence, there was a kind of strength, the quiet determination to survive until spring returned. After months of relentless cold, the first hints of spring arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. For medieval peasants, these changes were not marked by calendars or clocks, but by the land itself. The subtle shifts in air, the softening of soil, the lengthening of daylight. The snow began to recede, revealing patches of dark earth beneath. Streams, once frozen solid, trickled with water again, their sound a promise of renewal. Birds returned, their calls breaking the silence that had hung heavy through winter. Each sign carried hope, a reminder that survival had meaning, that endurance had purpose. The village stirred with anticipation. Families stepped outside more often, gathering wood without the bite of frost, tending animals in gentler air. Children played in the thawing fields, their laughter carrying farther now that the wind no longer howled. The rhythm of life shifted from endurance to preparation, from survival to growth. Food stores, though depleted, were stretched carefully until the first fresh greens appeared. Nettles, wild garlic, and early shoots were gathered, their taste sharp but welcome after months of dried and salted fare. These small harvests carried not only nourishment but joy, a reminder that the land was alive again. Work resumed in the fields. Men repaired tools, women prepared seeds, and children helped clear plots of land. The soil was damp, heavy, and stubborn, but it carried promise. Each furrow turned was a step toward abundance. Each seed planted a declaration of hope. The community felt the change together. Neighbors shared news of sprouting plants, of animals birthing young, of streams flowing freely. The church marked the season with prayers of thanksgiving, rituals that bound the village in gratitude. Faith, which had carried them through the dark, now celebrated renewal. The first signs of spring were not dramatic, but profound. They reminded peasants that hardship was temporary, that endurance led to reward, that life was a cycle of struggle and renewal. The cold had tested them, but the thaw promised growth. For medieval families, spring was not only a season, but a victory. It was proof that their resilience had carried them through, that their labor and unity had meaning. The quiet signs, a bird's call, a stream's trickle, a sprout of green, were celebrated as triumphs, each one a promise that abundance would return. The first signs of spring remind us that survival is not only about enduring hardship, but about recognizing renewal. For peasants, these moments were not taken for granted. They were cherished, honored, and woven into the rhythm of life. And so, as the snow melted and the earth softened, the medieval village stepped into spring with gratitude. The long winter had ended, the cold had passed, and life began again. With the first signs of spring stirring the land, medieval peasants turned their attention to the fields. Winter had been endured, but survival depended on what came next, the careful preparation of soil for planting. This work was not glamorous, nor was it easy, but it was the foundation of life. The thaw revealed earth that was heavy, damp, and stubborn. Snowmelt left patches of mud, and frost still lingered beneath the surface. Men and women worked together to break the soil, using wooden plows tipped with iron, hoes, and spades. Oxen were harnessed to drag plows across the fields, their strength essential for cutting furrows into the hardened ground. Every step was laborious, every furrow a victory against the land's resistance. Tools were simple but vital. Wooden plows carved the first lines, while hand tools refined them. Repairs made during winter were now tested, and broken handles or dull blades could delay progress. Families took pride in maintaining their tools, for they knew that the quality of their work determined the harvest to come. Seeds were prepared with care. Grain from the previous year's harvest was set aside, stored through the winter, and now measured out for planting. Wheat, barley, rye, and oats were the staples, each chosen for its resilience and yield. Families rationed seed carefully, knowing that waste could mean hunger later. The rhythm of planting was communal. Villagers worked side by side, sharing oxen, tools, and labor. One family's field was plowed with the help of neighbors, and in return, they offered their strength when others needed it. The village moved as a collective, each household contributing to the cycle of growth. Children played their part as well. They carried water, scattered straw, or helped sow seeds by hand. Their small tasks were woven into the larger rhythm, teaching them early that survival depended on effort. Even the youngest understood that the fields were life itself. Faith, prayers were offered before planting, blessings sought for fertile soil and abundant harvests. Rituals marked the season, binding the community in hope. The church reminded villagers that their labor was not only physical but spiritual, that the land's renewal was a gift as much as a challenge. The preparation of fields carried urgency. The window for planting was narrow, and delays could ruin the season. Families rose early, worked until dusk, and pressed through fatigue. The memory of winter's hunger drove them forward, each furrow a promise of food, each seed a step toward survival. By the end of the day, the fields began to change. Lines of furrows stretched across the land, seeds buried beneath damp soil, oxen resting after long hours of labor. The village carried a sense of cautious optimism. The work was far from finished, but the first steps had been taken, the foundation laid for the harvest to come. Preparing the fields for planting was more than labor. It was renewal. It marked the transition from endurance to growth, from survival to hope. The peasants understood that the harvest was never guaranteed, but their resilience, their unity, and their faith gave them strength to face the season ahead. And so, as spring deepened and the earth softened, medieval villages turned to their fields. Their hands were rough, their tools simple, their bodies weary, but their spirits carried determination. The soil was prepared, the seeds sown, and life began again. With the fields prepared and seeds sown, medieval life shifted into a new rhythm. Spring was not a season of rest, but of relentless work. It was a time when every hour mattered. The survival of the village depended on the careful balance of tasks, woven into daily routine. The mornings began early. Families rose with the sun, tending first to animals. Cows and goats were milked, chickens fed, and pens cleaned. The health of livestock was vital, for they provided food, labor, and trade. Children carried water from streams, learning the importance of consistency. Once the animals were cared for, attention turned to the fields. Men guided oxen along furrows, ensuring seeds were covered and soil pressed firmly. Women weeded, sowed additional crops, and checked for signs of growth. The work was repetitive but essential, building toward the promise of harvest. Tools were constantly in use. Hoes, spades, and plows were carried from one plot to another, their wear showing the strain of daily labor. Repairs were made quickly, for a broken tool could delay progress. The rhythm of work was measured by necessity, regardless of fatigue. Meals punctuated the day, but were simple and quick. Bread, cheese, and broth sustained workers, eaten in the fields or beside the hearth. Food was fuel, not leisure, and every bite carried the memory of winter scarcity. The rhythm of labor left little time for indulgence. Community bonds shaped the season. Neighbors worked side by side, sharing oxen, tools, and strength. The village moved as a collective. Faith accompanied the rhythm. Prayers were whispered before planting. Blessings sought for fertile soil. Rituals marked the season, binding the community in hope. The church reminded villagers that their labor was not only physical but spiritual, that the renewal of land was a gift as much as a challenge. Evenings brought exhaustion, but not idleness. Tools were cleaned, clothing mended, and food prepared for the next day. Families gathered briefly, sharing news of growth, of animals, of weather. The rhythm of springtime labor was relentless, but carried a sense of purpose. The season demanded endurance, but it also carried hope. Each sprout of green was a reminder that winter had passed, that life was renewed. The rhythm of labor was heavy, but it was also life itself, the heartbeat of the village. Springtime labor planted more than seeds. It planted resilience. It taught patience, discipline, and unity. The peasants understood the harvest was never guaranteed, but their effort gave them strength. Their faith sustained them. And so, as spring deepened, medieval villages embraced the rhythm. Their hands were rough, their bodies weary, but their spirits carried determination. The soil was tended, the seeds sown, and life moved forward, step by step, day by day. By the time spring's planting was complete, the rhythm of village life shifted once again. Summer brought longer days, heavier labor, and the promise of abundance. For medieval peasants, this season was both a burden and a blessing, a time when survival meant relentless work. But it was also when the rewards of their endurance began to show. The fields demanded constant attention. Crops sprouted quickly under the warmth of the sun, but weeds grew just as fast. Families spent long hours bent over furrows, pulling unwanted plants, protecting fragile shoots, and ensuring that grain had room to thrive. Oxen were guided through fields to break soil further, while children scattered straw to protect seedlings from pests. Every hand was needed, every task essential. Livestock required equal care. Animals grazed in pastures, but they had to be watched closely. Cows and goats provided milk, sheep gave wool, and chickens laid eggs. Summer was also the season of breeding and growth, when young animals were raised and prepared for the coming winter. The health of livestock was as important as the health of crops, and peasants balanced both with careful attention. Food stores began to change. Fresh vegetables appeared, replacing the dried and salted fare of winter. Herbs were gathered, berries picked, and early fruits enjoyed. Families preserved what they could, drying, salting, or storing in cool cellars. The taste of fresh food carried joy, a reminder that hardship was temporary and that the land could be generous. Summer also brought communal labor. Villagers worked together to repair fences, maintain wells, and share tools. Paths were cleared, barns reinforced, and cottages patched against storms. The long days allowed more work, but they also demanded cooperation. No family could manage alone, and the bonds of community grew stronger through shared effort. The season carried risks. Heat could wither crops, storms could flatten fields, and illness could spread quickly in the warmth. Insects threatened grain, and animals sometimes fell sick. Peasants lived with constant vigilance. Yet summer carried rewards that winter could never offer. The sight of green fields, the taste of fresh food, the laughter of children playing in the sun. These moments gave strength. Evenings brought a different rhythm than winter. Families gathered outside cottages, sharing meals in the open air, speaking with neighbors, and enjoying the longer light. Songs were sung, stories told, and faith expressed in gratitude. The quiet joy of summer balanced the exhaustion of labor, offering moments of peace amid the demands. Summer's demands and rewards defined medieval life. It was a season of toil, but also of renewal, of abundance, of hope. The peasants understood that the harvest was not yet guaranteed, but the signs of growth carried promise. Their bodies were weary, their hands rough, but their spirits were lifted by the land's generosity. And so, as summer deepened, medieval villages embraced both the burden and the blessing. Their labor was relentless. The fields grew, the animals thrived, and life moved forward, sustained by the rhythm of the season. Summer's labor led to its climax in the harvest. For medieval peasants, this was the most demanding and decisive time of the year. The success or failure of the harvest determined whether families would endure the coming winter or face hunger and hardship. The fields, now golden with ripened grain, called for every hand. Men, women, and children worked from dawn until dusk, cutting stalks with sickles, binding them into sheaves. The rhythm was relentless. Swing, cut, bind, carry. Each movement was essential for the survival of the village. Sweat mixed with dust, muscles ached, but the urgency of the season left no room for pause. Threshing followed, separating grain from stalk. Flails struck rhythmically, the sound echoing across the village. Grain was gathered, winnowed, and stored in sacks or bins, guarded carefully against dampness and pests. Each kernel was precious, each measure of grain a safeguard against hunger. The harvest was communal. Neighbors worked side by side, sharing tools, oxen, and labor. One family's field was cut with the help of others, and in return they offered their strength elsewhere. The village moved as a collective, bound by necessity and strengthened by cooperation. Food was abundant for a brief time. Fresh bread was baked, vegetables gathered, and meat prepared for feasts. The joy of plenty balanced the exhaustion of labor. Songs were sung in gratitude, expressed for the land's generosity. The harvest was not only survival, but celebration, a reminder that hardship could yield abundance. Yet the season carried risks. Storms could flatten fields, pests could spoil grain, and accidents could injure workers. The urgency of harvest meant that every setback was costly, every delay dangerous. Families worked with vigilance, knowing that the margin between plenty and scarcity was thin. The church marked the harvest with rituals of thanksgiving. Offerings were made, blessings sought, and festivals held. Faith bound the community in gratitude, reminding them that abundance was both earned and gifted. By the end of the season, barns were filled, granaries stocked, and cottages prepared for winter. The exhaustion of labor gave way to relief, the weight of survival eased by the sight of full stores. The harvest was complete, and the village could face the cold with strength. The height of harvest season was more than toil. It was triumph. It marked the culmination of months of endurance, the reward for resilience, the promise of survival. The peasants understood that the cycle of hardship and renewal defined their lives, but in the harvest they found meaning. And so, as the sun set on the final day of harvest, medieval villages rested. Their hands were rough, their bodies weary, but their spirits carried satisfaction. The fields were bare, the barns full. The story of survival through winter, spring, summer, and harvest reminds us of the resilience of ordinary people. Their lives were shaped by hardship, but their strength carried them through. Their unity, their labor, and their faith sustained them. Good night.